The first scream was a child's, sharp and piercing, a sound that sliced through the manicured tranquility of the Finch estate like a shard of glass. It was followed instantly by a second, deeper shout, a man's voice, rough with panic. Alistair Finch didn't register that the second voice was his own. He was already moving, his billion-dollar phone call with Tokyo forgotten, the device tumbling from his hand to crash, unheeded, onto the marble terrace. He vaulted the low stone balustrade, his polished Italian loafers digging into the pristine lawn as he sprinted towards the woods bordering his property. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, wild drumbeat of pure terror. Leo, his son, the singular, irreplaceable center of his universe. The manicured grass gave way to the untamed undergrowth of the forest, branches clawing at his bespoke suit. "Leo!" he roared, his voice raw. He burst into a small clearing, a sun-dappled space that should have been idyllic, but was now the scene of a primal nightmare. His son, his small 7-year-old Leo, stood frozen, his face a pale mask of horror. Inches from his feet, coiled and ready, was a snake. A copperhead, its venomous head a perfect, terrible triangle. Its body a tapestry of deadly brown and copper. Time seemed to warp, stretching into an unbearable, silent eternity. Alistair saw it all in a horrifying slow-motion tableau, the snake's muscles tensing for the strike. Leo's wide, unblinking eyes, his own useless, paralyzed distance. He was too far. He would never make it. Then, from the periphery, a blur of motion, a flash of a faded blue dress and tangled brown hair. A little girl, no older than Leo, shot out from behind a thicket of ferns. She didn't scream. She didn't hesitate. With a feral cry of effort, she threw her small body forward, shoving Leo with all her might. He tumbled backward, landing in a heap on a soft patch of moss, safely out of range. But the girl wasn't so lucky. The snake, its attack diverted, struck with vicious speed, its fangs sinking deep into the girl's bare calf. A small choked gasp escaped her lips. Her eyes, wide and shockingly green, met Alistair's for a fleeting second before they rolled back in her head and she crumpled to the forest floor. For a moment there was only the sound of the wind rustling the leaves, a quiet, indifferent witness to the horror. Then Leo started screaming again, a wail of terror and confusion, and the world crashed back into motion. Alistair finally reached his son, scooping him into his arms and shielding his face from the scene, even as his own eyes remained fixed on the small, still form on the ground and the snake slithering away into the shadows. His security team crashed through the trees, their voices a cacophony of urgent questions, but Alistair couldn't hear them. All he could see was the little girl, in the faded blue dress, a stranger who had appeared from nowhere and thrown herself in front of death to save his son. The minutes that followed were a maelstrom of controlled chaos. Marcus, the head of his security detail, a man whose unflappable demeanor had been tested by paparazzi, corporate spies, and credible threats, was for the first time, in Alistair's memory, visibly shaken. He was barking orders, his voice tight. One man was on the phone with emergency services, rattling off their precise location with a GPS-like accuracy, while another, trained in field medicine, was already kneeling beside the unconscious girl. Alistair held Leo, who was trembling violently, his face buried in his father's shoulder, his small hands clutching the fabric of his jacket. Is she dead, Daddy?" Leo's voice was a muffled whisper, thick with tears. Alistair's throat was tight, a knot of emotions he couldn't begin to unravel. Relief, so potent it was nauseating, warred with a cold, creeping dread. "No, son, no, they're helping her." He couldn't bring himself to look too closely. The medic, a former Army corpsman named Peterson, had produced a snake-bite kit and was working with grim efficiency. He'd cut away the fabric of her dress around the wound, exposing 2 small, dark puncture marks already surrounded by an angry, swelling redness. Alistair's stomach churned. He was a man who controlled global markets, who could make or break companies with a single word, but here, in the woods behind his own home, he was utterly helpless. He felt a surge of irrational anger. Who was this child? Where had she come from? The woods were supposed to be secure, his property a fortress. The perimeter fence was state-of-the-art. No one was supposed to be able to get in. His mind, always racing, always analyzing, began to churn through possibilities, each one more cynical than the last. Was this a setup? A twisted, elaborate scheme to get to him through his son? It seemed insane. But Alistair had built his empire on a foundation of healthy paranoia. He'd seen the depths to which people would sink for money. The wail of a distant siren grew steadily closer, a sound that was usually a nuisance, but was now the most welcome noise in the world. He watched as Peterson carefully marked the edge of the swelling with a pen. "We need to keep her still. Minimize movement," Peterson said, his voice calm but strained. "The venom travels through the lymphatic system. We need to slow it down." Alistair felt Leo flinch in his arms at the word venom. He tightened his grip, trying to project a sense of calm he was nowhere near feeling. He forced his eyes away from the girl and back to his son. "Leo, are you okay? Did it touch you?" Leo shook his head, his face still hidden. "She pushed me," he whispered. "She pushed me away." The paramedics arrived, a team of 3, their movements practiced and urgent. They swarmed the small clearing, their equipment clanking softly. Questions were fired at Marcus and Peterson, who answered with concise, professional brevity. Alistair stood back, a silent, powerful observer who was suddenly just another bystander. He watched as they placed a small oxygen mask over the girl's face, as they started an IV in her tiny arm, as they gently but quickly loaded her onto a stretcher. Her face was pale, almost translucent, her brown hair fanned out against the white of the pillow. She looked impossibly fragile, a broken doll. As they carried her out of the woods, one of her worn-out sneakers fell off her foot and landed on the mossy ground. It was old and scuffed, the sole separating from the canvas, held together with a piece of gray tape. The sight of it, so humble, so pathetic, struck Alistair with an unexpected force. It was a detail that didn't fit with the narrative of a sophisticated extortion plot. It spoke of poverty, of a life lived 1,000,000 miles away from the curated perfection of his own. "Sir," Marcus said, his voice pulling Alistair from his thoughts, "we should get back to the house. I need to get a statement from you, and from Leo, when he's ready." Alistair nodded, his gaze still on the discarded sneaker. "Find out who she is, Marcus. I want to know everything. Where she lives, who her parents are, why she was on my property. Everything." There was a cold edge to his voice, the tone of a CEO demanding a report, but beneath it, something else stirred. A flicker of something. It wasn't gratitude, not yet. It was more complex, a disquieting sense of obligation, a debt he hadn't asked for, but was now irrevocably owed. He turned, carrying Leo, and walked back towards the pristine mansion that suddenly felt less like a fortress. and more like a gilded cage, its illusion of safety shattered by one little girl in a faded blue dress. The hospital was a blur of antiseptic white and muted, anxious sounds. Alistair had insisted on the best, a private wing at the city's most exclusive medical center, a place where the air itself seemed to hum with the quiet efficiency of money. He'd followed the ambulance in his own car, leaving Leo with his nanny, a decision that had caused his son to break down into fresh sobs. "I want to stay with her," Leo had cried, clinging to him. "She saved me." Alistair had pried him away gently, his own heart aching with a confusing mix of emotions. He needed to be here, to oversee things, to ensure this situation was managed. That was the word his mind kept circling back to. This was a crisis to be managed. He sat in a private waiting room, a space designed to insulate the wealthy from the common anxieties of the less fortunate. It was furnished with plush leather chairs and abstract art, a coffee machine that hissed quietly in the corner. But the luxurious surroundings did nothing to calm the turmoil inside him. He'd already made a dozen calls. His lawyers were on alert. His PR team was standing by, ready to spin the story. Though what the story even was, he wasn't sure. Marcus had stayed behind to sweep the woods and review the perimeter security footage. An intruder was an intruder, no matter how small. A doctor entered the room, a woman with tired, intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. Dr. Evans. She was the head of pediatrics and an expert in toxicology. "Mr. Finch," she said, her voice even. "I'm Dr. Evans. We've identified the venom as coming from a copperhead, as your man suspected. It's a hemotoxin, which means it attacks the blood cells and tissues. The good news is that we have the correct antivenom, and we administered the first dose as soon as she arrived." Alistair stood up, his posture rigid. Will she be all right? It was the only question that mattered. The prognosis is good, but she's not out of the woods. The next 24 to 48 hours are critical. The venom has caused significant swelling and tissue damage in her leg. We're managing her pain, but she's a very sick little girl. Her heart rate and blood pressure are unstable. We have her in the pediatric ICU. He processed the information, stripping it of emotion, filing it away as data. ICU, unstable, critical. These were words he understood in a business context. Applied to a child, they felt alien and brutal. "Whatever she needs, doctor, whatever it costs. I want the best specialists, the best equipment. Fly them in if you have to." Dr. Evans gave a small, weary nod. "We're already doing everything we can, Mr. Finch. Your generosity is noted. But right now, what she needs is for the antivenom to work, and for her own body to be strong enough to fight." Her gaze was direct, and for a moment, Alistair felt as though she could see right through his expensive suit to the cold, calculating machinery of his mind. It was a look he wasn't used to, a look that wasn't tinged with the deference or fear he usually commanded. "We need to identify her," Dr. Evans continued. "We need to contact her parents. Does she have any known allergies? Medical conditions? This information is vital." "My head of security is working on it," Alistair said curtly. "He'll find them." Just then, his phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "We have an ID, sir," Marcus said, his voice tinny through the speaker. "Her name is Lila Petrova. She's 8 years old, and she didn't breach the perimeter." Alistair frowned. "What are you talking about? She was in my woods." "Yes, sir, but she and her mother live there." In the old caretaker's cottage at the far edge of the property. It's technically on your land, but it's been overlooked. The original deed from when your father bought the land decades ago included a lifetime tenancy for the caretaker and his family. The man died years ago, but his daughter, her mother, is still there. Alistair felt a spike of irritation, a loose end, a detail missed. He hated missed details. The mother's name is Elena Petrova. I have a team on the way to the cottage now to inform her. No, Alistair said, a sudden, inexplicable impulse taking over. Don't send a team. I'll go myself. The words surprised him, even as he said them. Why would he do that? It was inefficient. It was a task to be delegated. But the image of the girl's scuffed sneaker flashed in his mind. He wanted to see where she came from. He needed to understand the context of this anomaly that had crashed into his ordered world. Sir? Marcus sounded confused. Just have a car waiting for me. I'm on my way. He ended the call and looked at Dr. Evans. I'm going to find her mother. Dr. Evans's expression softened almost imperceptibly. That would be for the best. She'll be very frightened. Alistair nodded, turning to leave. As he walked down the hushed, sterile corridor, the clinical smell of the hospital felt cloying. He was stepping out of his world of calculated risks and predictable outcomes and into something messy, something human. He was going to meet the mother of the girl who had saved his son, and for the first time in a very long time. Alistair Finch had no idea what to expect. The caretaker's cottage was tucked away in a part of the estate Alistair hadn't visited in years. It was a forgotten corner, overgrown and wild, a stark contrast to the meticulously sculpted gardens closer to the main house. The asphalt of the main drive gave way to a gravel track, which then devolved into a simple dirt path, barely wide enough for the black town car that now crunched to a halt. Alistair stepped out, his suit feeling absurdly out of place in the rustic setting. The cottage was small, almost ramshackle, with peeling white paint and a roof that sagged slightly in the middle. But there were signs of life and care. A small, neat patch of garden was filled with vegetables, and a makeshift bird feeder hung from the branch of a gnarled oak tree. A thin curl of smoke rose from the stone chimney. It was a scene from another century. He felt like an intruder, a feeling he despised. He walked up the stone path, his footsteps loud in the quiet air. Before he could knock, the door creaked open. A woman stood there, her frame thin and frail, wrapped in a thick woolen shawl, despite the mildness of the day. She had the same wide green eyes as the girl, though hers were clouded with worry and a deep, settled weariness. Her hair, a mix of brown and gray, was pulled back from a face that might have once been beautiful, but was now etched with lines of hardship. This must be Elena Petrova. Can I help you? Her voice was soft, with a faint, unplaceable accent. She looked at his expensive suit, at the gleaming car behind him, and a flicker of fear crossed her face. The fear of a woman used to bad news arriving in official-looking packages. Mrs. Petrova, Alistair began, his voice sounding harsh and overly formal to his own ears. My name is Alistair Finch. He trailed off, unsure how to proceed. How do you tell a mother that her child is in an intensive care unit because she just saved your own? You are the owner, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She pulled the shawl tighter around herself. Has Lila done something wrong? She is a good girl, I promise. She knows not to go near the big house. The simple, desperate plea in her voice disarmed him completely. The armor of cynicism he wore every day felt suddenly heavy and useless. "No," he said, his voice softening. "She's done nothing wrong. Mrs. Petrova, there's been an accident. She's been hurt." The woman's face crumpled. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin ashen. She swayed on her feet, and Alistair instinctively reached out, grabbing her arm to steady her. Her arm was shockingly thin, like a bird's wing. "What happened? Where is she?" she asked, her voice cracking. "She's at the hospital. She's safe. She's with the best doctors." He tried to keep his tone reassuring, but the words felt hollow. He led her to a rickety wooden bench near the door and gently sat her down. He then recounted the story, his voice low and factual, editing out the most terrifying details, but not shying away from the truth. He told her about the snake, about how Leo had been in danger, and about Lila's incredible, selfless bravery. As he spoke, Elena Petrova listened, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. Tears streamed silently down her face, but she made no sound. When he finished, there was a long silence, broken only by the chirping of a bird in the oak tree. "She has always been like that," Elena said finally, her gaze distant, always looking out for things smaller than herself. Stray cats, injured birds, my brave, foolish little girl. She looked up at him, her green eyes searching his face. Will she be? "The doctors are optimistic," Alistair said, offering the only comfort he could. "They are doing everything for her. And I want you to know, Mrs. Petrova, that I will cover every expense. Everything she needs, she will have. I owe her a debt I can never repay." Elena shook her head slowly. She would not think of it as a debt. She just saw a little boy who was afraid. She took a shuddering breath and seemed to gather some hidden strength. She stood up, her back a little straighter. "I must go to her. I must be with her." "Of course," Alistair said. "My car will take you there right now." He helped her to the car, his hand on her elbow. As she settled into the plush leather seat, she looked so small and out of place, a fragile sparrow in a gilded cage. As the car pulled away, Alistair remained standing in front of the little cottage. He looked at the vegetable patch, at the peeling paint, at the quiet, desperate poverty of it all. This was the home of the hero who had saved his son. He had come here seeking answers, expecting to uncover a scheme. Instead, he had found a quiet, dignified woman and a story of simple, heartbreaking courage. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if the solid ground of his world had shifted beneath his feet. The debt he owed was not just financial, he was beginning to realize. It was something far deeper, something that couldn't be settled with a simple transaction. The thought was both terrifying and, in a strange way, liberating. Back at the hospital, the atmosphere was thick with a hushed tension that Alistair found more unnerving than any boardroom negotiation. He had escorted Elena to the pediatric ICU, where a nurse had gently explained Lila's condition and allowed her to sit by her daughter's bedside. Alistair had watched from the doorway for a moment, an observer on the edge of a profoundly intimate scene. Elena held Lila's small, limp hand, her fingers tracing the back of it as she murmured soft words in a language Alistair didn't recognize. Lila was dwarfed by the hospital bed and the array of machines that beeped and hummed around her, a constant electronic measure of her struggle. Her face was pale and slick with a sheen of feverish sweat, her breathing shallow. Her leg, propped on a pillow, was swollen to almost twice its normal size, the skin a bruised, angry purple. The sight was sickening. It was a raw, visceral display of suffering that Alistair's wealth and power could do nothing to immediately erase. He could only pay for the machines, for the medicine, for the room. He couldn't breathe for her. He couldn't fight the venom that was coursing through her veins. He retreated to the waiting room, the image seared into his mind. He found Leo there, curled up on one of the leather sofas. His nanny, a kind, middle-aged woman named Clara, sat beside him, her hand resting on his back. Leo had refused to stay at home, insisting with a 7-year-old's stubborn logic that he had to be near Lila. Alistair had relented, knowing a fight would be pointless. Leo looked up as he entered, his eyes red-rimmed and full of a heavy, adult-like guilt. "Is she okay, Daddy?" he asked, his voice small. Alistair sat down opposite him. "She's fighting, Leo. She's very brave. It's my fault," Leo whispered, looking down at his hands. "I wasn't supposed to go into the woods. You told me not to." "No," Alistair said, his voice firm but gentle. "This is not your fault. It was an accident. A terrible, terrible accident." But even as he said the words, a part of him recoiled. Was it entirely an accident? Why had Leo wandered off? He was usually such an obedient child. Had he been lonely? Bored? The questions were uncomfortable, pointing to deficiencies in his own parenting that he preferred not to examine. His life was a tightly controlled schedule of meetings, calls, and travel. The time he allocated for Leo was quality time, efficient and planned. A trip to a museum, an hour playing catch in the garden. But how much time was just time? The unstructured, unhurried moments where a boy might tell his father he was lonely. A nurse appeared at the door. "Mr. Finch, Dr. Evans would like a word with you." Alistair found the doctor in a small office, her face grim. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "Lila is having a reaction to the antivenom." Alistair's blood ran cold. "What kind of reaction?" "Anaphylaxis. It's rare, but it happens. Her body is treating the cure as another poison. Her blood pressure is dropping, and she's having trouble breathing. We've administered epinephrine, and we're managing the symptoms, but we can't give her any more of this specific antivenom." "So, what does that mean?" Alistair demanded, his voice sharp with fear. "It means the venom is still in her system, doing damage, and our primary weapon against it is off the table." Dr. Evans ran a hand through her hair, a gesture of profound frustration. "There is another option, a different type of antivenom, a newer, experimental one. It's produced in Australia, derived from a different animal base, so she's less likely to react to it. But it's not widely available. It's not even fully approved for use here yet." "Get it," Alistair said instantly. "I don't care what it takes. I don't care what it costs. Get it here." "Mr. Finch, it's not that simple. There are regulations, customs, international transport logistics for sensitive medical materials." "I have a jet," Alistair cut in, his mind already leaping ahead, formulating a plan. "A Gulfstream G650. It can be in the air in 90 minutes. It can get to Australia and back faster than any commercial flight. You tell me where it needs to go and who to talk to, and I will handle the rest. Regulations can be expedited. I will call the Secretary of Health if I have to. I will call the President." Dr. Evans stared at him, her expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. She had clearly dealt with wealthy benefactors before, but this was a different level of power altogether. She seemed to realize she was no longer just dealing with a concerned father, but with a force of nature, a man who bent the world to his will through sheer, relentless force of capital and connections. She nodded slowly, a small, hopeful smile touching her lips for the first time. "Okay, Mr. Finch. Okay, let's make some calls." For the next hour, the small hospital office became a global command center. Alistair was on his phone, his voice calm and authoritative, slicing through layers of bureaucracy with surgical precision. He spoke to air traffic controllers, to diplomats, to government officials, to the CEO of the Australian pharmaceutical company that produced the anti-venom. Doors that would have been closed to anyone else swung open. Rules that were ironclad suddenly became flexible. While Dr. Evans coordinated with the medical teams on the other side of the world, Alistair orchestrated the logistics, a symphony of power and influence. He was back in his element, solving an impossible problem, and it felt good. It was a way to fight back against the helplessness that had been suffocating him. But as he worked, a nagging thought kept pushing its way to the surface. He was moving heaven and earth for this little girl. He was leveraging his entire empire for her. Why? Was it just to clear a debt? Or was it something more? He glanced out of the office window and saw Leo standing in the hallway, his small face pressed against the glass of the ICU's waiting area, looking in the direction of Lila's room. He was keeping vigil. And in that moment, Alistair understood. He wasn't just doing this for the girl. He was doing it for his son. He was doing it because Leo was watching. And for the first time, Alistair cared more about the man his son would see him as than the man the world saw him as. The jet was in the air, streaking across the night sky towards the other side of the planet, a silver needle racing against time. The mission was underway, and all Alistair could do now was wait. The wait was a unique form of torture for a man accustomed to constant action. The hospital's private waiting room began to feel like a prison cell, its quiet luxury mocking the life and death struggle happening just a few walls away. Alistair had sent Clara and a reluctant Leo home to get some sleep, promising to call with any news. Now, in the dead of night, the only occupants of the room were him and Elena Petrova. She had refused to leave Lila's side for hours, until a nurse had gently, but firmly insisted she take a break, get some food, and rest. She now sat in a chair across from him, a cup of untouched tea on the table beside her. She had a quiet, unnerving stillness about her, a stark contrast to Alistair's own restless energy. He had been pacing for an hour, his mind a whirlwind of flight plans, medical reports, and contingency scenarios. She simply sat, her hands folded in her lap, her gaze fixed on the door, as if she could will her daughter to be well through sheer, focused love. The silence between them was heavy, filled with all the things they were not saying. They were from different universes, this frail, poor woman, and the titan of industry. The only thing they had in common was the small child fighting for her life down the hall. Finally, unable to bear the quiet any longer, Alistair spoke. "She is a remarkable child, your daughter." Elena's gaze shifted to him. A faint, sad smile touched her lips. "She has a good heart. Better than mine, I think." "Why would you say that?" Alistair asked, genuinely curious. "She has a strength I have lost," Elena said, her voice soft and reflective. She looked down at her hands, at the worn, calloused skin. "My husband, Lila's father. He was a good man, a carpenter, strong. He could build anything. But he got sick, a sickness in his lungs from the dust. It took him slowly. Took our savings first, then his strength, then his life. Alistair listened, saying nothing. He was used to people wanting something from him, to conversations being a prelude to a request. This was different. This was just a story. When he died, something in me broke, Elena continued. The world seemed a dark place, full of hardship. I wanted to hide Lila away from it, to keep her safe in our little cottage. But she would not let me. She sees the good in things. She finds joy in a wildflower, in a stray cat that lets her pet it. She is not afraid of the world. I think she gets that from her father. She looked at Alistair again, her green eyes clear and penetrating. Your boy. He seemed sad. Before the snake. The observation caught Alistair off guard. It was so direct, so simple, yet it struck him with the force of a physical blow. He's a quiet boy, Alistair said, the defensive words sounding weak even to himself. His mother passed away a few years ago. It's just been the two of us. He rarely spoke of his wife, Caroline. The pain was still a raw, private thing. She had been the light in his life, the one who had balanced his ambition with warmth and laughter. When he lost her, he had thrown himself into his work, building his empire higher and higher, as if he could create a fortress of success tall enough to keep grief out. He had thought he was protecting Leo by giving him everything money could buy, by shielding him from any possible harm. But Elena's words made him wonder if he had only succeeded in building the walls of his son's loneliness. It is hard, Elena said with a quiet empathy that asked for nothing in return, to be both mother and father, to be strong for them when you feel weak. They sat in silence again, but it was a different kind of silence now. It was no longer empty, but filled with a shared, unspoken understanding of loss and the fierce, desperate love for a child. Alistair found himself looking at this woman not as a problem to be managed, or a charity case to be pitied, but as a person, a fellow parent, who was navigating the treacherous waters of life with a courage he had never known. The hours crawled by. Alistair received hourly updates from his pilot. They were making incredible time, aided by favorable winds and cleared flight paths. Dr. Evans came by periodically, her face etched with worry. Lila's condition was stable, but it was a fragile stability. The venom was still doing its insidious work, and they were fighting a rearguard action, treating symptoms, trying to support her body's functions until the new anti-venom arrived. Finally, as the first gray light of dawn began to creep into the sky, his phone rang. It was the pilot. "We've landed, Mr. Finch. The package is secure. We're refueling and will be wheels up in 20 minutes. We're coming home." A wave of relief, so powerful it made him dizzy, washed over Alistair. Phase 1 was complete. He relayed the news to Dr. Evans, who allowed herself a small, exhausted smile. "Now the race really begins," she said. "Let's hope we're in time." He went to find Elena. She had fallen asleep in her chair, her head slumped to one side. She looked so utterly exhausted, so worn down by life, that Alistair felt a pang of something he could only identify as compassion. He gently touched her shoulder. She started awake, her eyes wide with alarm. "Is it Lila?" "No, she's the same," he said softly. "But the medicine is on its way. It will be here this afternoon." The relief on her face was profound. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," Alistair said, the words feeling rough and inadequate in his mouth. Your daughter. What she did. He couldn't finish the sentence. He simply nodded and walked away, retreating behind the wall of his own stoicism. But the wall was beginning to crumble. He had spent his life accumulating wealth and power, believing them to be the ultimate measures of a man's worth. But in the last 24 hours, he had been shown a different kind of strength, a different kind of wealth. The fierce, unwavering love of a mother. The selfless, instinctive courage of a child. And he was beginning to suspect that his own vast fortune was nothing compared to that. The arrival of the anti-venom was an exercise in precision logistics. A police escort met the private plane on the tarmac, bypassing customs and whisking the climate-controlled container straight to the hospital. The package was rushed to the pharmacy, prepared, and then brought to the PICU, where Dr. Evans and her team were waiting. Alistair and Elena watched through the glass as the new medicine was administered, a slow, careful drip into Lila's IV line. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. The first hour passed with no change. Then the second. Lila's vital signs remained stubbornly erratic. The swelling in her leg did not subside. A heavy sense of despair began to settle back into the room. Alistair felt the familiar, bitter taste of failure. He had moved mountains, bent the world to his will, and for what? It wasn't working. He saw the hope draining from Elena's face, replaced by a look of utter desolation. He had to do something. He couldn't just stand here and watch this woman's heart break. He went to find Leo, who had returned to the hospital with Clara. He found his son in the hospital's small, quiet chapel, a place Alistair hadn't even known existed. Leo wasn't praying. He was just sitting in a pew, staring at a stained glass window. "Hey, buddy," Alistair said softly, sitting down next to him. Leo didn't look at him. "Is she going to die?" he asked, his voice flat. "We don't know," Alistair answered honestly. "The doctors are doing everything they can." "She saved me," Leo said again, the words a mantra of his guilt. "I should have been the one who got bit." "Don't ever say that," Alistair said, his voice sharp. He pulled his son into a hug. Leo resisted for a moment, then collapsed against him, his small body shaking with silent sobs. "I'm scared, Daddy." "I know," Alistair whispered, his own throat tight. "I'm scared too." It was the truest thing he had said in years. He held his son, offering the simple comfort of his presence, and realized how long it had been since he had done so. He was always solving problems, issuing orders, providing solutions. He had forgotten how to just be there. After a while, Leo's sobs subsided. He looked up at his father. "Can I see her?" Alistair hesitated. The PICU was no place for a child. But then he looked at his son's determined face and thought of Lila, lying in that bed, fighting all alone. "Let me ask," he said. Dr. Evans was reluctant at first, but Alistair pressed, explaining how much it meant to Leo. Finally, she agreed. 5 minutes, and he has to be very quiet. Leo, dressed in a small visitor's gown, walked slowly to Lila's bedside. Alistair and Elena watched from the doorway. He looked at the machines, at the tubes, his face a mixture of fear and awe. He reached out and very gently touched Lila's hand, the one her mother wasn't holding. "Lila," he whispered, "it's me, Leo." There was no response. Her eyes remained closed. "Thank you," Leo said, his voice trembling. "You're my hero. Please wake up. I want to show you my treehouse. It has a slide. You'd like it." He stood there for a moment longer, just holding her hand. Then, impossibly, something happened. a flicker. The numbers on the heart rate monitor, which had been dangerously low, ticked up slightly. The jagged line on the screen seemed to even out just a little. Dr. Evans, who had been watching intently, took a sharp breath. "Look," she whispered. On the monitor, Lila's blood pressure, which had been frighteningly unstable, was beginning to climb, moving slowly but steadily back towards the normal range. It was a minuscule change, almost imperceptible, but it was a change in the right direction. It was as if the simple, heartfelt words of a little boy had reached her in whatever dark place she was, a lifeline pulling her back towards the surface. A tear escaped Elena's eye and traced a path down her cheek. She looked at Leo with an expression of profound gratitude. Alistair felt a lump in his throat. He put his hand on his son's shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the small miracle they had just witnessed. It wasn't the expensive, experimental drug that had turned the tide. It wasn't the private jet or the powerful connections. It was a child's voice, a promise of friendship, a simple, human connection. The medicine would do its work. The science would heal her body. But it was hope that had called her back. The next few days were a slow, arduous climb out of the abyss. The new anti-venom, now that Lila's body had accepted it, began its work, neutralizing the last of the venom. The swelling in her leg started to recede, the angry purple fading to a bruised yellow. The machines that had sustained her were gradually removed, one by one, their insistent beeping replaced by the much more welcome sound of her own steady breathing. Lila drifted in and out of consciousness, her moments of lucidity brief and confused. But with each passing day, those moments grew longer. Elena was a constant presence at her bedside, holding her hand, stroking her hair, speaking to her in a soothing, endless stream of words. Alistair found himself drawn to the hospital, spending more time in the quiet waiting room than he did in his own gleaming corner office. He brought his laptop, pretending to work, but he found he couldn't concentrate. His thoughts kept drifting to the room down the hall. He watched the quiet, tireless devotion of Elena, and he saw a strength that dwarfed his own. His power was external, derived from his wealth. Hers was internal, a deep, inexhaustible well of love. Leo was also a daily visitor. He would sit quietly by Lila's bed, telling her about his day, about the books he was reading, about the squirrels he'd seen in the garden. He'd bring her small, carefully chosen gifts, a smooth gray stone from the creek, a brightly colored maple leaf, a drawing he had made of the two of them playing under a smiling sun. One afternoon, Alistair walked in to see Leo carefully reading a chapter of a fantasy book aloud to a sleeping Lila, his voice soft but clear. The sight struck a chord deep inside him. He remembered Caroline reading to Leo like that, her voice a warm, gentle melody. After she died, the bedtime stories had stopped. Another small, essential piece of childhood that he had let slip away. That night, for the first time in years, Alistair read a bedtime story to his son. Leo curled up beside him, his head on his father's chest, and listened with rapt attention. As Alistair's voice filled the quiet room, he felt a sense of connection to his son that had been missing for too long. It was a small, simple act, but it felt momentous, a step back towards the man Caroline had loved, the father he was supposed to be. The turning point came a week after the bite. Alistair and Leo were in the room with Elena when Lila's eyes fluttered open. But this time, they stayed open. They were clear, focused. Her gaze moved from her mother to Leo, and then to Alistair. A small, weak smile touched her lips, "Hi, Leo," she whispered, her voice raspy. Leo's face broke into a radiant grin. "You're awake!" Elena burst into tears of relief, burying her face in the blankets. Lila looked at her mother, then back at Leo. "Did you see the snake?" she asked, her voice a little stronger. "It was a big one." "You pushed me," Leo said, his eyes wide with awe. "You were so brave." Lila just shrugged, a small movement of her thin shoulders. "You were scared. I wasn't." Alistair watched the exchange, a silent observer. The sheer uncomplicated goodness of the child was staggering. There was no artifice, no expectation of reward. She had acted from a place of pure, unthinking empathy. Later that day, Dr. Evans came in, her face wreathed in a genuine happy smile. "Well, young lady," she said to Lila, "you gave us all quite a scare, but you are one tough cookie." She turned to Alistair and Elena. "She's officially out of danger. The recovery will be long. She'll need physical therapy for her leg, and the tissue damage will leave a significant scar. But she's going to make a full recovery." The relief in the room was palpable, a physical thing. Alistair felt the knot of tension that had been lodged in his chest for a week finally dissolve. The crisis was over. The debt was paid? No, he knew that wasn't right. Paying the medical bills was the easy part. That was a simple transaction. But the debt he truly owed was not to Lila, but to himself and his son. Lila had not just saved Leo's life. She had saved them both from the cold, empty fortress he had built around their hearts. He knew that things could not go back to the way they were. The caretaker's cottage with its peeling paint, Elena's quiet struggle, Leo's loneliness, his own emotional distance. These were not things he could ignore any longer. A new chapter had to begin. He just wasn't sure how to write it. Lila's recovery progressed with the slow, steady determination that seemed to define her character. The days in the hospital turned into weeks. Physical therapists worked with her daily, helping her regain strength and movement in her damaged leg. The pain was often intense, but she rarely complained, facing each challenge with a quiet grit that impressed the entire hospital staff. Alistair made sure she had the best of everything: a private room filled with books and toys, tutors to help her keep up with her schoolwork, even a personal chef to cook anything she desired. But he noticed that the things that made her happiest were not the expensive gifts, but the simple ones. She was most excited when Leo visited, his pockets full of treasures from the woods. They would spend hours playing card games, drawing pictures, or just talking, their two small heads bent close together in quiet conspiracy. They had forged a bond in the crucible of that terrifying moment in the woods, a friendship that was pure and unconditional, oblivious to the vast chasm of wealth and class that separated their worlds. Alistair became a regular fixture at the hospital, a silent presence in the background. He watched the children, listened to their easy laughter, and felt a profound sense of longing. He wanted that for Leo. He wanted that for himself. He found himself having long conversations with Elena. He learned about her life, her struggles, her quiet hopes for her daughter. He discovered she was a talented artist, that she painted beautiful, delicate watercolors of the flora and fauna in the woods around her cottage. She had stopped painting after her husband died, she explained, the joy gone out of it. Alistair found himself wanting to see that joy return to her eyes. He was changing. The change was subtle at first, a slight shift in his priorities, a new perspective on what constituted a successful day. He started leaving the office earlier. He took Leo's calls in the middle of board meetings, something he would have considered unthinkable before. He began to see the world not just as a series of markets to be conquered and assets to be acquired, but as a place filled with small, fragile, beautiful things that needed to be protected. The day Lila was finally discharged from the hospital was a bright, sunny afternoon. Alistair had arranged for his car to take her and Elena home. As he watched them prepare to leave, a plan that had been forming in his mind for days finally solidified. This couldn't be the end of the story. He couldn't just send them back to their crumbling cottage and their life of hardship, writing a generous check as a final gesture. That would be an insult to Lila's courage, an insult to the bond the children had formed. He walked over to Elena, who was carefully folding one of Lila's new dresses into a small, worn suitcase. "Elena," he said, his voice quiet but firm, "I don't want you to go back to the cottage." She looked up at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and alarm. "But it is my home." "It's falling apart," Alistair said gently. "It's no place for a child to recover, or for you to live. I have a proposal for you. There's a guest house on the estate, not far from the main house. It has 3 bedrooms, a modern kitchen, a lovely garden. It's been empty for years. I want you and Lila to live there." Elena stared at him, speechless. I could not possibly accept such a thing," she stammered. "It would be charity." "It is not charity," Alistair insisted. "It is an arrangement. I need someone to look after the gardens around the guest house, and I would like to commission you to paint a series of watercolors of the estate's grounds. I will pay you a generous salary for both." He could see the pride warring with the practicality in her eyes. "And there's another reason," he added, his voice softer. He gestured towards the doorway, where Leo and Lila were saying their goodbyes, a process that involved a solemn pinky swear to see each other the very next day. "Your daughter is the best friend my son has ever had. She is teaching him things I never could. How to be brave, how to be kind. I don't want to take that away from him. Please, Elena, let the children be near each other." He saw the resolve in her eyes crumble, replaced by the deep, overwhelming love for her daughter. She looked at Lila, who was now laughing at something Leo had whispered to her, her face brighter and more animated than Alistair had ever seen it. Elena turned back to him, and a slow, grateful smile spread across her face. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Mr. Finch, we accept." Alistair felt a weight lift from his shoulders. It felt right. It felt good. For the first time in his life, he had made a decision that wasn't based on profit margins or strategic advantage, but on simple, human decency. The guest house was transformed. Alistair had a team of designers and contractors work around the clock, renovating it to perfection. It was filled with comfortable furniture, a brand new kitchen, and one room was converted into a bright, airy art studio for Elena, its windows overlooking a rose garden. Lila's room was painted a cheerful yellow, with a bookshelf filled to bursting with new books. When Elena and Lila saw it for the first time, they were overwhelmed. Lila ran from room to room, her initial shyness forgotten in her excitement. Elena stood in her new studio, her hand resting on the smooth, untouched surface of a new easel, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I don't know what to say," she whispered to Alistair, who had been watching from the doorway. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. just be happy here. Life on the Finch estate settled into a new rhythm. The invisible walls that had once separated the main house from the caretaker's cottage were gone. Now, the sound of children's laughter was a common occurrence, echoing through the gardens as Leo and Lila explored their shared world. They built the best treehouse the estate had ever seen, with a real slide and a secret password for entry. They had picnics by the creek and spent hours searching for interesting rocks and flowers. Lila, with her innate knowledge of the natural world, showed Leo things he had never noticed before. The way a spider spun its web, the different calls of the birds, the best places to find wild raspberries. And Leo, in turn, shared his world with her. He taught her how to play chess. They watched movies in his private home theater, and he introduced her to the wonders of the internet, which Lila found both fascinating and slightly terrifying. Through his son's friendship with Lila, Alistair began to truly see the girl, not as a symbol of bravery or a debt to be repaid, but as a bright, funny, resilient child. He also saw his own son blossom. The quiet, solitary boy was replaced by a confident, happy child who was no longer lonely. Alistair's relationship with Elena also deepened. He would often stop by the guest house in the evenings, ostensibly to check on the gardens, but really to talk to her. He would watch her paint, her hands, once raw and calloused, now moving with a graceful confidence across the paper, bringing the beauty of the estate to life with vibrant colors. She had a wisdom and a tranquility about her that he found grounding. She never offered advice, but in talking to her about his day, about the pressures of his work, he often found his own solutions. She was his friend, he realized, with some surprise one day. A genuine friend, something he hadn't had in a very long time. One crisp autumn evening, Alistair, Elena, Leo, and Lila were sitting on the terrace of the main house, roasting marshmallows over a small fire pit. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange and pink. Lila was telling a ghost story, her voice a dramatic whisper, and Leo was hanging on every word, his eyes wide. Alistair looked at the scene, at the four of them together, and felt a sense of peace, a sense of belonging, that he hadn't felt since Caroline was alive. This was family. Not a traditional one, perhaps, but a family nonetheless. One forged in a moment of terror, and rebuilt through acts of kindness and connection. Elena caught his eye and smiled, a warm, knowing smile. She raised her marshmallow to him in a silent toast. In that moment, Alistair understood the true nature of wealth. It wasn't in the stock portfolios or the real estate holdings. It wasn't in the private jets or the bespoke suits. True wealth was this. It was the warmth of a fire on a cool night. It was the sound of children's laughter. It was the quiet companionship of a friend. It was the profound, humbling gratitude for a second chance. A little girl in a faded blue dress had thrown herself in front of a snake to save his son. But in doing so, she had saved him too. She had shown him the way back to his own heart, and for that he would be forever in her debt.